All right, the car alarm has taken a little rest. I'm sure it'll be back soon. It's one of those. But yes, we left this idea of menace. That is, what does it mean to have violated the first canon? It means to do the opposite of what engineers are supposed to do. You're making the world worse. And in the specifics of this essay, you're putting lives in danger. That's what it really means to be a menace. You should be making the world better. And you should be making the world safer for people. And instead, you're making it more dangerous. You're risking people's lives. That's what it means to violate the first canon. It may not be the only way to violate the first canon, but it's definitely the most radical way. And the rest of the essay is really a matter of specifying when you're acting as a menace, and with various, the first stab at it here: engineers shall not participate in projects that subject others to a risk of death. Problems with that, all sorts of problems, nitpicky little problems in getting the right formulation. But finally, the first principle: engineers shall not participate in projects that degrade ambient levels of public safety unless information concerning those degradations is made generally available. So that gives you, for what it's worth, a certain rule to work by. You can't participate in a project that degrades the level of public safety unless the information about that degradation has been made generally available. And what that means to Kipnis is that if you do realize you're engaged in such a project, you have to withdraw. You cannot continue to participate in such a project. You at the very least, you have to personally refuse to work on it. Now, there are all sorts of other questions. Do you have to quit your job? What do you do if you realize you have worked on a project in the past that you now realize is a menace? Okay, all sorts of questions. But the main thing is that you have to, if you realize you are working on such a project, you simply have to withdraw. Obviously, one of the big questions we had in class, which is an absolutely natural question, is that all you have to do? Don't you, in some cases, have a duty to warn those at risk, as he says? Well, he says maybe, but he's not going to go into that. And in his defense, what he then says is that, well, the duty not to harm is stronger than the duty to prevent harm. The duty not to kill is stronger than the duty to prevent somebody from being killed, which doesn't mean that in some cases we don't have a duty to prevent somebody from being killed, but that what he really wants to focus on is the first duty. And he gives you the example of the guy who worked on the disastrous DC-10 in the 70s, which is actually pretty good example. Did we actually look at the BER case? 10-5? I can't remember. We did. Interesting case. Very interesting case, I think, which we discussed pretty thoroughly in class again, if my memory serves me right. About an engineer who observes a potential safety hazard on an adjoining work site. What are their duties under the code? Interesting case. Basically, there are no duties. I mean, some kind of like lame idea that you should inform your employer, but no real explanation as to why. And the point not being that you should employ. The point of the case is not, oh, you should tell your employer. The point of the case is to say that engineers can't be expected, as they say right here, an engineer cannot be expected to take on personal or professional responsibility for each and every potential health and safety risk they may be exposed to in the course of a day. Oh, the car alarm is back, but I closed the window. Okay, so we'll continue. that this would, to impose such a responsibility upon an engineer, could thrust the engineer into a never-ending scope of activities that are beyond what is reasonable. That is the big point of this case. But to put a limit on first canon duties in some respect, I don't know if it's, as we said, I don't know if it's the right decision, but it's basically the point they wanted to make is that if you, in a case like this, say that the engineer has some duty to make sure something is done about safety hazard on the other site, then you're on a slippery slope where the engineer is then responsible for everything that he or she may see in the course of a day fortuitously, and that this would put an unreasonable burden on the engineer.